This afternoon, we're going to have a dialogue about Japan's trust enigma, and we're especially pleased to be co-hosting to this event together with Edelman. And we welcome Mr. Richard Edelman on his first visit to Japan in 3 years since the borders have reopened. So a big welcome to Japan. It's so good to see you here with us today. So my name is Gabriella, and I work in our English MBA office for student recruitment. And I'll be somewhat of your MC today, so I look forward to that. A few housekeeping notes just before we go ahead and get started. So first things first, this event is being recorded, and it's also being photographed for distribution through Globus and Edelman channels. So please let the photographer who will be walking around, you put his hand up back there, or the videographers, let them know if you do not wish to have your photo taken or be in a video. But just as a note, the videos will be kind of from the back of the heads, so most of the time it shouldn't be too clear from front face wise. Also, Globus Insights, they will be our online publication. They will be live tweeting this event today. So if you want to tune in on Twitter, then you can actually tune in at Globus Insights anytime during the event today. And feel free to join the conversation online as well with your tweets. So for our agenda today, what we're going to do is we're going to start off with a presentation by Mr. Edelman. And then we're going to have that followed up by a discussion moderated by Mr. Hori, after which we're going to open the floor for Q&A. So do keep those questions that you want to ask for the Q&A session and kind of come up with some good ones for later on. And then what I would like to do just before we hand things over is I would like to do a quick speaker introduction. And if we could move to the slides for introductions, that would be wonderful to help me out here. So for introductions, Mr. Richard Edelman is the CEO of Edelman and chairman of Daniel J. Edelman Holdings, the firm's holding company. And now in his 26 years as CEO, Richard is one of the longest tenured agency's leaders in the marketing service industry. So as the creator of the annual Edelman Trust Barometer, Richard has become one of the most foremost authorities on trust in business, government, media, and NGOs. And now in its 22nd year, the Edelman Trust Barometer is widely recognized as the leading piece of research on trust. And Mr. Yoshito Hori, who will be later facilitating in the dialogue section, he's the president and founder of Globus University, as well as the founder and managing partner of Globus Capital Partners, which is one of Japan's leading venture capital firms. So they're committed to speaking positive changes in society. And because of this, he founded the G1 Summit, which we have here at Globus 2 every year, the Global, a Japanese version of the World Economic Forum. And he launched the Kibao Foundation to support rebuilding after the 2011 Tohoku earthquake and tsunami. And he has acquired a basketball team called the Ibaraki Robots, which you might have if you're on campus seen outside as well, which is a basketball team in his hometown of Mito. And he's also the owner of Ibaraki's only prefecture-wide media company, Ibaraki Broadcast System. So that's a lot from my end, but I would really like to hand things over today. And I want to hand it over to Mr. Edelman for his presentation on the latest trust data and ask that he turns his mic on and everyone give him a big round of applause as he comes to the stage.
I'm incredibly happy to be back. It's been 3 long years. So let me start off by telling you about 3 or 4 important trends in trust. Trend 1, business is the most trusted institution in the world. Business passed NGOs, government, and media as of 2021. Why? Competence, ability to get things done. Government had a brief shining moment during the height of the pandemic. Prior 19 years, NGOs were the leading institution in trust. Number 2, the mass class divide in trust. The divide between the high income and low income. It started in the US, the UK, and France. You saw Brexit, you saw Macron, you saw Trump. Now, this is a global phenomenon. It's in Germany, it's in Thailand, it's in Japan, and it's in Canada. Happy Canada. Okay, mass class divide, because the people in the lower income feel wages are flat, cost of living is going up, I'm getting screwed. And I'm mad. Populism, government change, etc. Trend number 3, the battle for truth. People going to thought bubbles. There's less and less objective media. There's less and less quality information. People are frozen in place by indecision. And they feel also that media has become politicized, chasing clicks, and they're signing off of media. And social media is, let's put it this way generously, inaccurate. So it's insufficient, let's put it that way. And so these macro trends are also highlighted by a fourth, which is that autocracies have populations that trust institutions much more than democracies. And that is partly a function of superior economic performance, but it's also a lack of cognitive dissonance between what the media says and what the government says. Partly because the government owns the media. But the reality is China, India, Singapore, they're all, Saudi Arabia, they're all in the highest end of trust. It is partly a geographic thing. It is partly an Asian thing. But as you'll see, there are plenty of countries in Asia in low trust. So it's an autocracy versus democracy. Democracy is losing the trust battle. And that's a scary thing if you're from a democracy. So let me cut to the chase and go to the videotape, meaning that's a joke. Okay, so I want to start out by telling you that Japan was fatally wounded in terms of trust in 2011 in Fukushima and has never recovered its trust levels. I will make the case that all institutions failed. They didn't tell the truth, and the Japanese people held them responsible for what was, in effect, a complete debacle. So, take a look at the declines in trust in 1 year. Japan moved from a solid middle position, akin again to Holland or Germany, a sort of European-like level, to the lowest in the world in 1 year. And the biggest drop was in government, NGOs, then media. Business hardly moved. Now remember that number 47. It's relevant because that's what the number is today. There's been zero increase in trust in business since Fukushima, but the other institutions have recovered. So when there is a dramatic event, you see significant trust loss. You also see destruction of belief in leaders. Leaders as spokespeople, but again, a 55-point drop for government officials. 43 for CEOs, 43 for regular employees, 38 for academics, only 17 for a person like myself, so people close to me. But again, I trust nobody. In effect, this is a nullity. Japan is a nation of distrusters. And I would argue that it makes it very difficult to run forward when you're looking backward over your shoulder. And it's part of Japan's malaise, the lack of trust in institutions. So let's quantify this. Japan is second from the bottom. Only the Russians trust their institutions less. This is hardly something to be recommending. Now, I also want you to see, though, that America and Britain have become fourth and fifth from the bottom. And American trust is a phenomenon. Republicans are the reason for the loss of trust in America, meaning Republican trust in institutions, in media, in government, in the 20s. So America's number is lowered by low trust in institutions by Republicans. The sad reality is that you'll not find a democracy over 60. We consider 60 the dividing line of trust. If you're sort of in the okay level, you're in the 50s, but not a single democracy is on the top that is in the West. You see democracies in Asia, but none in the West. So when I talk about institutional failing, democracies in the West are losing. All institutions are distrusted in Japan. Remember, I told you that number 47 to be remembered? Business today is 46. It has not budged since 2012. There has been significant rises in government, media, and NGOs, but in effect, sort of recovering to somewhat less than they had before. So you see a new sort of low level across the board. But that business is the most trusted institution, remember I said that? This is true in Japan as well. It's true in almost every country in the world, except for the autocracies, except for China, except for, like this, Saudi. Okay, of all the slides I'm going to show you today, this is the most important one. The mass class divide in Japan is today 21 points. 5 years ago, it was 2 points, gone from 2 to 21. And the reason for this is actually low trust in business. Take a look at the delta between high-income earners and low-income earners about trust in business in Japan. It's 28 points. This is about the highest in the world of any country we study, that delta about business. This is a bad thing for business. I have some hypotheses about why that is, but it has to do with wage levels. It has to do with a sense of fairness. Okay, it's not great for the other institutions either, by the way, media, government, etc. But business, this should be circled with a big red line, because this is going to cause trouble. Trust inequality in Japan has not been this high since the recovery period from Fukushima. Mass class divide is back to where it was in the year after Fukushima. And again, we haven't had a disaster. We haven't had an event. We haven't had a causing thing, which was Fukushima. So you can't explain it away through, oh, it was a crisis. No, this is a slow developing crisis, which business better wake up to. And Hori-san and I really have to talk about this, the why, the how, and the what to fix. Also, again, this is a change for Japan that was caused by Fukushima. The lowest levels of trust are the establishment leaders who are the classic authority figures. Government leaders, journalists, CEOs, all distrusted in Japan. Who's trusted? Scientists, and trust is local in my CEO. This is a very important trend. The trust has moved from top down, Moses model, to peer-to-peer 10 years ago. Now, because social media is a cesspool, it's moved to local. My CEO, my company, my company's publications, because I can control that relationship. If I don't like it, I can quit. I can go somewhere else. Now, Japan on the world stage. Japan Inc. thinks of itself quite highly, that it's respected, that it has high trust levels. I'm here to tell you that's not true. Japan has lost its edge. Brand Japan in the developed markets is no longer trusted. In developed countries, US, Germany, etc., and I'll give you the specifics in a moment, you'll see that Japan has lost its position. So if you compare it to the market leaders, Canada, Germany, etc., Japan does just fine in the developing markets. But if you're Sega and you're selling into Germany or the US or etc., you've got to be concerned about the drop in trust in developed markets. Now, specifically, where did the trust go down? Well, it went down 9 points in the US in a year. It went down 7 points in Canada. It went down like this. So the point is, why? And again, I'll get to some hypotheses in a minute. But fine in developing, not in developed. Again, as a comparable, I want you to look at brand Japan having peaked 4 years ago and off 11 points in 3 or 4 years is a lot. Brand Japan is back to where it was a year after Fukushima. That is hardly a moment of commendation. Not good. The US under Obama was fine. The Trump factor was not good for America. I won't say what party I'm from. Okay. Why is it that brand Japan has deteriorated in its position? And why is it that business has lost its trust levels among the lower income people? Let's start to unpack this. So, first, Japanese business has not heard the demand by the stakeholders to speak up, not just about economic issues such as good jobs or safe products or innovation or grow the economy. That's the obvious. Everybody knows about that. The new responsibility of business is to talk about societal issues. Job training, support local communities, address climate change, address discrimination. However, unlike many countries, Japanese do not want their companies involved in geopolitics. Probably because you have one foot on either side of the divide. China over here, the US over here, and you're desperately trying to stay balanced. But on societal, Japanese companies are completely missing the moment. This is in Japan by something like 20 to 1, 25 to 1. You see, we want more Japanese companies to speak up about climate change, reskilling, economic inequality, all of these issues that are standard operating procedure in the US, the UK, now even Germany. Japan CEOs are completely missing this boat. Consumers in Japan tell us if brands speak up on their behalf about climate or about other issues, they are 5 to 7 times more likely to buy, support, and talk about in a positive way the brand. So this is the consumer side of the argument about why speak up. Also, I want you to see about climate that this is an opportunity for brands. Japanese think of themselves as eco-warriors, but they don't behave that way. They actually confess to us, 83% of them, there's a gap between my lifestyle and what's necessary to do for the climate. And 44% say, I've done nothing to change my behavior. 42% say, basically, I've done a few things, but not if it costs me any money. So again, big opportunity and necessity for brands to stand up. The other argument for companies about trust is employees. You want the best and the brightest, you want the Globus B School graduate, you've got to be much more oriented to societal, not just economic. If you understand this slide, you will appreciate the importance of getting your workforce to believe in you. Trust is in my employer. The trust advantage between all institutions and my employer is vast. In Japan, it's 22 points. In the US, it's 27. But this puts special responsibilities on companies to stand up and speak up because there's much less distance between home and work. if people are working remotely or things of this nature. It's a Venn diagram. It's no longer discrete. And so with this trust comes responsibility and expectation. The majority of job seekers tell us they expect employer engagement. I am much more likely to go to work for a company in Japan if it speaks up about human rights or inequality or even gender equality. You'll get the best and the brightest if you are forward-leaning on issues. The area of most need for Japan is changing the mentality of CEOs from defense to offense, from speaking up to ducking. I say this with respect, but Japanese CEOs are 100% sit back, economic warriors. They need to be leaders. In Japan, it is, listen to me, CEO should be personally visible when discussing policy issues with external stakeholders or work the company has done to benefit society. 3/4 say this. This is damn important. 3/4 want CEOs to stand up and speak up. Also, there's a distinction. Most Japanese people, oh, that's political. No, there's a distinction between political and policy. Political? No, we don't want you to elect who the next leader is. Stay out of that. But about wage inequality, jobs in the economy, technology and automation. By the way, 85% of Japanese in the lower income think they're going to lose their job to automation in the next 10 years. 85%. That's a high level of fear. It's hard to work if you think you're going to be fired. Inform policy. Be part of change. I don't want you to be depressed by this presentation. I want you to be coming to your CEOs with solutions. And one of those opportunities is climate. I went to the Milan Expo about 6 years ago, and the Japan exhibit was really well ahead of its time about water use and about the possibility of renewables. And Japan has it sitting here. I'll show you. Everyone recognizes that there's a problem. By the way, the headline in the FT today, failure of climate talks at Sharm el-Sheikh between the developed world and the developing world. The Chinese are refusing to give any money and the Americans are totally mute. The Germans are pushing for it, but most likely just stymied. There's more concern about higher income. There's, interestingly, more concern among older people about climate in Japan. Here's something else interesting. About half of Japanese worry that other countries are going to renege on their commitments if Japan sacrifices that China's going to cheat. And also, look at the low trust levels about the commitments by the developing world to climate remediation. Only 30% of people believe that the Chinese will do what's right in addressing climate change. India low, Saudi low, Mexico low, Brazil low. Who do they believe? Canada, Germany, the UK, and Japan. That's important. Japan has permission to play. What I want to assert today is, number one, Japan is being hamstrung by being caught in a cycle of distrust. And it's going to have to be business that leads the way in this fix, because it's the only institution that has no bounce since 2011. Since Fukushima, businesses had zero bounce. In other markets, businesses had a significant rise in trust, not in Japan. 2, the role for business in societal change is here to stay. It may be more profound in the West than it is in the East, but the demand for Sega and others that are playing cross-border is massive. Whether it's swearing off Kanye West or any other sort of societal action, this is what's necessary. 3rd, we've got to get quality information in front of people in order to facilitate change. At the moment, we're stymied by the a political divide, by the demise of mainstream media. And part of what is fascinating to me is across every institution, the number one trust driver is quality information for business, for NGOs, for government, not just for media. Everybody says media is fine, but it needs to be surround sound. Last, CEOs must lead from the front. Again, this is not intuitive in Japan, but you don't have to be Howard Schultz to be a leader. You don't have to be bleeding edge. You don't have to be so far in front. But to speak up about race, about wage levels, about sustainability, and about geopolitics. Those are the fabulous four. Other issues, you can defer. Gun control, abortion, voting rights, all these other things. Other people can lead. But those four, business has to lead. So, Hori-san, hopefully I've given people enough kind of ammunition to have good debate with us and good questions. And I want to thank Dean Hori for having me, also for having built such an incredible institution over 30 years. It's really a credit to you and your entrepreneurial genius. So let's get the lights on and have a discussion. Thank you.
Welcome to Japan. And it's been 3 years since you have come over here. But we've been meeting each other in Davos and also, so Richard is a good friend of mine. And when I heard that Richard is coming to Japan, why don't we do this Trust Barometer seminar so that we all will have a good understanding about what is going on in the world and why trust is important and so forth. So let me ask you one question first. Why trust inequality depending upon the income? And if I look around the world in G7 nations, we see the divisions in societies in the US, UK, seen from Brexit and also Europe as well. But I haven't seen that happening in Japan. But if you look at what is going on in terms of the trust inequality depending upon income, I become a little bit worried about what is going on. Why do you think it's happening here in Japan?
So trust inequality started in the US, UK, and France in about 2014. Our data started to show it before Trump, before Brexit. And it was a delayed reaction to the financial crisis. Normally what happened in prior crises was, again, that the sense was, okay, we had a problem and there was a fair solution. And then people in my country started to recognize a lot of this government money went to rich people who then stock market went up and then they became really rich in hedge funds and all this and made them mad. And so the reason that you start to see this transversal mass class divide is automation, downward pressure on wages. I think in Japan, you've had fairly flat wages for 20-something years, and loss of belief. So fears exacerbated about, downward mobility. And I don't believe I can do the Japanese dream. I don't believe I'm going to be with a summer house or a vacation or whatever it is. I'm trapped.
By looking at your presentation, what is the most, let's say, trust barometer you are worried about with regards to Japan?
This mass class divide. Okay. This mass class divide worries me like hell because it's one thing for there to be low trust, but if there's differential trust, then it's potential for earthquake. And it doesn't necessarily happen right away. But the population has to feel as if it is being dealt with fairly.
Okay. What do you think the government or the businesses should do to shorten or make the gap smaller? What kind of action should be taken?
I think the first thing that Japanese companies must do is the same as in America, which is reskilling.
Okay.
The guy who's on the line at Sega, as an instance, you might need 1/3 fewer in 5 years. What happens to those 1/3? Bye-bye. But is the government going to deal with it? I think business should deal with it now and upskill everybody so that they feel as if you're investing in their future. I also think the difference between business and government in the democracies on trust is competence. And that's why on so many issues like sustainability, don't wait for government. Don't wait for the mandate. Move. Do things like, for example, again, I see my friend from Sega, but if you see that people are gaming too many hours, fix the problem before government says we ban the time or whatever. You have the ability to do before it's required.
Okay. So the role of businesses is to do whatever the company think is right to be done earlier than the government. What do you think the government should do?
So I have these talks in the US and I say something that's going to sound ludicrous, but I believe it, which is stop being so damn political. I mean, not everything is the contest for votes. Actually, your job is to get work done and to get legislation passed and not to make short-term gains. The other is we have to stop this death grip between media and government.
Okay.
Because, and again, Warren has been editor of one of the most important newspapers in the world, but I argue that the business model of media has been move to extremes, left or right, say more outrageous things, get more clicks, and you get more subscriptions, and you get more advertising, and that's the business model.
Yeah.
Whether you're left or whether you're right. And meanwhile, for government, the two most retweeted people in the United States are Ted Cruz and AOC. Now, if you know anything about AOC, she's far left. Ted Cruz is lunatic.
So Trump
right.
is no longer.
Well, he's not in office, and he's been banned on Twitter. So, but maybe he'll be back soon if Twitter exists in a month. But the reality is, there's this death grip. It's a death machine because the more extreme things that the politicians say, the more the media thinks it causes attention. And I think the media really went down a sinkhole with Trump. He would tweet, and then right away somebody would write a story about it, and then they would get all sorts of stuff on cable TV, and then the politicians would react to it. It's like, give me a break that he burped. I burped. And then all of a sudden, it was a good burp. And I felt good after I burped. And then the story would be, I burped. I mean, who cares that you burped? Sorry. It made me sound like a Democrat.
Okay. One more question about, you said that CEOs have to speak up. And speaking up is difficult. In case, let's see, in the US, the issue of abortion was a big issue. And the Disney CEO spoke up.
Yes.
And then there was a backlash from the governor of Florida. And in Japan, the biggest issue is about nuclear energy. And if you speak up, there might be some kind of consumer resistance towards the buying or some kind of boycott of the consumer products. How do you think we should speak up as a CEO, and what kind of medium do you think we should use?
I think there are a few universal issues that CEOs must talk about. So, for example, fair treatment of women in the workplace.
Okay.
There's no place in this world where women should fear their employer, being sexual harassment or whatever. That's a universal. There's no place in the world where there should be bigotry against Black or Hispanic or Asian or that's universal. Sustainability is a universal. The issues like abortion, so the way we dealt with it was to say there'll be different views on this personally, but for our company, any woman who seeks medical services can be transported to another state that offers it.
Mm.
And that's where we left it. I did not go out publicly, and although I did say that I will give money personally to candidates who aim to reverse it,
Okay.
but I did not make my company policy this.
Okay.
And I think on the Disney case, which is very important to understand, companies should not go alone.
Okay.
You're too exposed. It's like being in Africa in the wild, and if you're a wildebeest, you should run with other wildebeest because there's a lion out there, usually a politician like DeSantis. And if you're a wildebeest going, oh, what a great day, I'm going to go left, and everybody else is going right, you may be lunch. So that's what happened. So all the companies signed a petition together about the Don't Say Gay bill. And the Disney CEO said, oh, well, I'm not like my predecessor. I'm not political. I don't do politics, so therefore Disney won't participate. Then his gay employees in Los Angeles went nuts. And so he said, oh, I'll participate. And then he went out by himself. He was the wildebeest. And DeSantis said, oh, I can kill you now. And so that's what happened. Bye-bye. So go together.
Go together.
Go together. Don't be solo actors. That is not because you're cowardly. It's because you like to not be eaten.
You mentioned that business is the most trusted institution compared to the government or media, or in the case of before, NGOs. And it has just turned out to be number one in 2021, you mentioned. Why is that? Why is business being trusted? And why are the other institutions are not trusted any longer?
So it is a matter of getting things done. NGOs are seen as more ethical. They're nice people, but they don't get things done. They're protesters, they're activists, but people saw in the pandemic, oh, we had drugs that were created from nothing for vaccines. We had masks. We had people who were able to work in KFC or some other place because they weren't paralyzed. And so business got a huge boost from the pandemic.
I see.
Now, the one area where business is downgraded is sustainability. And we just did a study 2 weeks ago, which I'll send to you, Dean Horit, which showed that the least trusted spokesperson in the world is the CEO about sustainability. And 2/3 of people think business lies about its commitments on green. It's a bad place to be. So business has to do better.
What do you think we should do in terms of sustainability? What kind of words should be spoken up?
I think the minimum standard is net zero by 2040, or commitment to the Paris Accords, and scope 3 emissions kind of standard would be ideal if such a thing can be defined. And so these are hard goals for business, but I don't think there's much choice, because otherwise the world is on pace to heat up between 2 and 2.5 degrees Celsius. If we heat up 2.5 degrees Celsius, we would see crop yields go down somewhere 30 to 50%. Meanwhile, population is going from 9 billion to 10. This is a bad scenario. And also, there's such irresponsible journalism, I hate to say it, in the Wall Street Journal, saying, well, we're not sure climate change is really happening. We're not sure that the temperature is really going up. And by the way, there's always mitigation. You know, places like Tokyo or London or New York, which are low-lying, we'll just put up sea gates and put walls up so that there's not floods. Well, good luck with that. I mean, you saw what happened to Pakistan last summer. That's just an early warning system for what can happen. I think business really has to be activist in this.
Good. Okay, before I open up for the floor, do you have any questions to me regarding Japan and also like trust barometer?
So I'm fascinated, Hori-san, about the hesitance of Japanese CEOs to speak up about societal issues. And is it a cultural thing? We don't talk, we just fight. Or is it a risk thing?
It's both. Well, like there is a saying in Japan that businesses should not mingle with politics or should not talk to politics. Because if you are in politics in either side, you get backlash or somehow you get revenge from other sides. If the party that you supported lose. And therefore, they are saying in Japan that businesses should not be too much close to the politics. That's number one. Therefore, not many people want to speak up. The only entity that speak up is as a group, like Keidanren or Doyukai. And not companies or not CEOs want to speak up by alone. And that's number one. And secondly, because of the Twitter storms that we happen to see, social media is making difficult to speak up because you get lots of criticism and you get lots of backlash. And at the same time, there might be some kind of consumer movement against your products might happen. And therefore, it's a risk thing as well as more cultural and historical way. Therefore, if you look at Japanese CEOs, you tend to believe the CEOs have like no means like you don't have any emotions. Like CEOs in Japan try not to show emotion or try not to speak up about societal issues or about political issues. But it's been changing because what you see happening in the US is more and more vocal CEOs tend to be, they are from startups. You see like all the people who are speaking, like tech companies. And the same things are happening here in Japan. More and more CEOs are startups like tech companies. And like us, like myself, I'm very vocal and social media, and also I'm quite speaking up a lot in politics as well. I have quite a few friends as well. And those people know how to handle social media and what to speak up, what not to speak up, how to use words, and how to respond whenever you see some kind of negative feedbacks. You can change it quite quickly. So you have a confidence to be able to speak up in social media as well as in publics. But most of the CEOs, become CEOs only in their 55, 56, or maybe late 60s, or maybe late 50s or early 60s, and they don't know how to handle the public. And they have not been trained that way. Therefore, we need Edelman to always be the good advisors in public relations. So they're not really so good in public relations. And therefore, they ended up not speaking up because culturally they have not been used to it. Secondly, the risk associated does not, if you think about return on investment, it's not worth doing it. That's what I see happening.
I mean, if I think of Japanese companies, Toyota, Nissan, Honda, in the car business, those CEOs have to talk about the necessity of transition to EVs.
Yeah.
And why it matters and how it matters, and that they're trying to serve mass market. I mean, like the Leaf, for instance, is something you can buy for $35,000 as opposed to $80,000 like a Tesla. So it's the everyman's EV. If I were head of Nissan, I would be all over that because it's the change that matters. Or Ajinomoto about the necessity of more vegetarian diet because we can't all eat meat. Otherwise, the planet is in trouble. So I think where there are issues in which a company has a valid reason to be an advocate, diet, like this, the CEOs are completely safe ground. On abortion or on things like this, nuclear energy is a fascinating subject.
Sure.
Because Japan, it seems to me, you don't want to do coal because ruin the planet. So can you persuade people to believe in nuclear energy again?
Yeah.
This is, if it's new nuclear, not old nuclear, maybe. Because you need affordable power in this country.
That's right.
You need affordable power, otherwise you'll lose your manufacturing edge.
We import 100% of fossil fuels, and fossil fuels produce CO2, and the nuclear energy is the solution to this climate change. And however, the politicians and also businesses have not been making efforts to persuade the public, and that's what I believe has to be done. And okay, shall we open up for questions from the floor? Okay, there's one gentleman over there.
Talk about the gap between the high income and low income through trust in business and government.
I think one thing that's missing here quite often is that people in low income don't feel that they're being heard or being understood. And one of the weaknesses of Japanese government or bureaucrats is they come from elite universities.
Mm.
And why is that because they don't have interaction with people on the lower level. And policies are being put forward. They sound good on paper, but really, if you talk to people, because I work in the field, that doesn't resonate with us. It's not going to create the impact that you're doing. And so I guess my question is, why has that change occurred in the last, 10 years? That, you now see this greater gap. I mean, I just speak for myself that I see the policies that are being put out by either businesses or government, and I go, that sounds really good for the masses, but I can tell you it has zero impact, and it doesn't resonate with the people down here.
Okay,
So
that's okay, Richard. What do you think?
I think Trump is a really interesting exercise in how you talk like an everyman and the power of greatest and biggest and first and always action verbs and long hour talks, but short sentences. And I think people really want to hear what they believe is from the horse's mouth. And they also want to hear from people who, again, Trump is hard to explain because he lives in Mar-a-Lago, which is not exactly every man's house. It's got like 30 rooms and 25 toilets. But, the point is, he talks like a trucker, and it works. And I think this point about elite universities is fascinating. I think it's one of Macron's big weaknesses in France, because everybody goes to what's the university in France? The engineering
what is it? Political eco-politics?
Politique. Yeah.
Yeah.
The time of the elites is over. And expertise is devalued because partly from the pandemic, partly because of this mass class divide. And so, and by the way, employees are not prepared to just listen to bosses. They're going to go out and tweet or whatever, or in Google, they all stood up and walked out because of Me Too settlement 5 years ago. So this mass action thing is partly a disgust with experts.
Any other questions? Yes.
So
The microphone is coming soon.
Thank you for all the thought-provoking data. I think a lot of questions I'd like to ask, but my biggest one is democracy doomed? Like, it seems at the core of trust and the reason that media is not trusted and news and everything else comes back to a lot of these different policies, which are actually more politics. And my understanding is in the States right now, you have the Trump party, the woke party, and the crypto party. At least that's my understanding of it. And I just I'm curious how you imagine the future of politics. Does democracy get better, or are there other things on the horizon that we should be thinking about? Thank you.
Richard.
Democracy is not doomed if on two things. One, we have to have quality information. The job of the media is to move back to authority and to both sides and to quality and not just to chase clicks. So that's condition one. And condition two is government has to deliver. And people have to believe that they still have a future and that their future depends on how hard they work and that it's fair. And so the things that government can do in the very short run is work with business about reskilling. We see this coming like a truck. That this automation thing is happening. The head of Ford announced that EVs will take 40% fewer workers to assemble because it's a battery, it's a few bumpers. And so what are those 40% of people going to do? There's going to be a huge uprising otherwise. I think second, that democracy has to deliver on listening, whoever that person was, about, it can't just be who's shrieking loudest. And it can't be just buying influence inside. It has to be seen as responsive. But I actually take great hope of the election in the US 10 days ago, because there was a rejection of authoritarianism. There was a vote for people who were normal. And so don't despair. You're too young to be cynical. Older people can be cynical.
Maybe there might be some questions from online.
Please. Or there's one there.
We do have some online questions. And just a reminder for our online participants as well, do use the Q&A function to post your questions, and then we'll get to those as well. So I'll go ahead with one for now, and there are more if we have time as well. So the question is, how would you differentiate distrust from apathy observed here in Japan? And what would be your advice to the younger generation to not lose heart when advocating for positive changes like DEI and ESG?
Sure.
I think in the US, it took the murder of George Floyd to shake people into advocacy on race. And you can argue it went too far, but the passion of the people who went out and marched and said, police violence or, whatever, was significant. And I think the youth of Japan, we see this in our Gen Z studies. Young people really are insisting on change led by business. And so again, it's in your interest, all of you in companies, to push that agenda. And the Gen Z will be more, again, willing to work for, willing to buy brands of companies that stand up and speak up.
Okay, maybe one more from online. And then there's a question. There are quite a few questions. Maybe let's go on to the floor.
Hello there, Yoshi. Nice to see you. Richard, it's been a long time. So one note on the French school, it's l'École Nationale d'Administration, ENA,
Go? I forget.
which Macron symbolically abolished before the presidential election, and changes, of course, nothing. So here's, I found the study significant and important. I think perhaps one would not have imagined that corporations would have declined so much. And I would present my own thesis. So 40% of the workers in this country are part-time temporary workers.
Oh my God.
They have low wages. They have no job security. They have limited benefits. They have no pension. They get intermittent training. This is the hidden dirty problem of this country. That was started in the 90s as a response to the crisis that Japanese companies faced. Since that time, Japanese companies have recovered. The debt in this country has moved from the private sector to the public sector. It's taken care of that way. Companies have piled up lots of cash, but sadly, they're not addressing this issue. And that could determine the fate of the nation 25 years from now.
What a statistic. By the way, are you still running a big bank?
I don't. I had too much fun.
Okay, shall we? Okay, there.
Thanks for the very interesting talk. So you pointed out Japan, the culture is an issue. I agree. Then what do you suggest to change the culture? What would be the role of education. For example, if you want to change the culture from training from kids, it takes 20 years. What can we do now in the education area to change the culture?
I think you need to have a mission. And I think if sustainability, for example, becomes the mission and that individual action led by Gen Zs motivates the nation, I think you can actually change culture. I know that Abe-san was, what is it, 15 years ago he did the 3 arrows? 10 years ago?
2009.
So you give or take.
2011. 2012.
And so 10 years ago.
2020.
By the way, I'm sorry for his loss. But the idea of including women in the workforce, for example, was a big idea. Is it successful? I can't say.
It's been successful.
And so that changes culture. So you need another big idea, like, again, so be the green nation, be the one that shows the way forward in behavior change or something like this. You have to shake the society's kind of hesitance. And you need a positive agenda. I mean, there's too much down talking of Japan. We're just this or just that. It's like Eeyore. You don't want, okay, you understood that.
Maybe online.
So this is another one from online. It has to do with misinformation spread. So basically in our daily lives, information plays a significant role with our trust and decisions in other countries. So this is used more for corporate and political purpose. What can Japan do to prepare for misinformation and disinformation from being spread both online and offline?
The reality is that the media sector is shrinking on the basis of economics. In a certain way, this is inexorable. We were with the head of a major marketing services agency last night who said newspapers are doomed. Is it 5 years? Is it 10 years? 20 years? This generation doesn't read newspapers and doesn't watch TV in the same way of local news and all this stuff. So how are we going to get quality information to people? Well, I think institutions are going to have to find ways to go direct to the end user. Example, if you're the prefecture of Nagasaki or whatever, you should have a news channel that what you're doing on health or what you're doing on education or whatever. And again, I think businesses have an important role in this. During the pandemic, because media was so polarized, my company's newsletter became the most important source of pandemic information about where to get a vaccine, whether to get a vaccine, what the side effects were, what if you got COVID, what to do, going back to the office, not going back there. So that's a shocker. That your company newsletter is more credible by 20 points than mainstream media is a huge condemnation of media. But again, it's an opportunity for business to not just do what might be termed as classic PR, which is just one side and everything is great and glorious, but there's two sides to the story, and here's third parties who say this or that, and you want to go deeper, go here. The fact of stasis is a function of disinformation. People can't move if they're paralyzed. They won't move unless they have a sense of full disclosure. And it shouldn't just be the loudmouths in social who determine whether or not the public discourse is served. If you're a company and you see misinformation up, you have two choices. You can ignore it, or you can talk back and say, actually, no, that's not so. The supply chain for Sega is as follows in China, and this is how we treat the workers, as opposed to, NGO saying bad things. Don't sit there and take it. It's a mistake, because that just gets replicated.
So you have to speak up.
Yeah. It's like a cancer. If you get it early, get it out, you're fine. If otherwise, you're screwed.
So that means like businesses and also CEOs have to speak up and also have full disclosure of what is going on so that we can get trusted.
How can we ensure that there's actually a robust dialogue on this? It seems as though there's a lot of one-wayism, if that's a term. So for example, you're citing the ESG protocols. One thing that gave people pause was that the ESG score of Exxon was much higher than that of Tesla, which to a person on the street would think it's kind of nonsense, right?
Impossible.
Sorry.
Inside joke.
The people that deigned to question some of the principles, like Stuart Clark at HSBC, he was run over by the pack of wildebeest, to use your term. So he's now become a journalist at the FT. But people that seem to question trying to get hooted off from the public forum, it seems. But my point is, if we're going to advance, which we all want, we have to make sure that we do have some gadflies, as difficult as it might be to deal with them, right?
Yeah, I think business is way too sensitive. And I think a good, healthy debate gives you much more power. And I'll give you our own story about climate. So Edelman was attacked by Clean Creatives because we work for oil companies. And they started writing our clients like Unilever and others saying, you should fire them. And they're awful people and burning the world. And so I said, okay, well, we'll do a review of our clients. We'll do a review of the work that we're doing. We'll get a climate training of all our people. We'll make sure that we have a board of outside experts to vet the work. And we did the review of 20 of our most energy intensive clients, and we quit 2 of them. And we didn't say which ones.
You quit.
We quit. And then we also quit. You'll know Standard Bank from Africa. They were doing a pipeline across Africa, and they said, you have to promote it. And we said, no, we won't do that. And they said, well, you're fired. And we said, we're fired. I mean, I think, and so by action and by having a process, I'm not saying that Clean Creatives is leaving me alone, but they more or less are leaving me alone for now. And that's okay. They did their thing. And what they did was actually constructive. Kicked me in the butt and I moved.
My point, there's a balance. So you saw the guy that was running Danone that had these immaculate ESG scores.
Yeah, and he didn't have
They put a bullet in his head.
He didn't have good performance.
You got to pay attention to the share price. You got to be in the seat in order to do all these other things, right?
It's all true. You got to be able to do forehand and backhand.
Any other questions? Yes.
Thank you. 2 things that stood out for me from your presentation were that Western democracy is essentially being decimated in the war on trust, and topping the list of government trust were China and India. Another thing you said was 30% of people actually believe that China will do what they say they will in terms of climate action. So how do we bridge this gap? How does Western democracy bridge the gap? Is there something to be said about the efficiency of authoritarian governments and how they disseminate public information? And how would Western democracies compete with that?
So I think China would have had a much bigger and better argument about 18 months ago. I think the Chinese model has been proven flawed in the pandemic. Its own people are rebelling against what seemed to be arbitrary lockdowns and lack of information and lack of ability to live. And the lack of information thing is, again, the most ironic, right? Because they have a government that theoretically was trusted. So I don't know that our scores are going to reflect the truth of what the Chinese actually think of their institutions. But it's not been a good run for the authoritarian side in the last couple of months. But in the longer run, the disparity or the divergence between what the media says and what the government says about disease, for instance, cost both institutions big time in the pandemic. And I'm not saying they should overlap, because the job of the media is to critique what the government does. But the pandemic was really a showing of the underwear and bad for institutions. Those institutions, good for business, by the way. Business had a much better set of facts.
good for businesses, bad for government,
Yes, and bad for media.
bad for the media.
Should have been good for media.
But it just became transparent. Everything people knew that, it's not because of pandemic, it's because of the fact that the government was not effective in handling.
Correct.
And the media was not effective in terms of disseminating information
But again, it became politicized too.
and politicized as well. Okay, it's
Thank you very much for this important lecture. Actually, I'm from media sector, from NHK. This is the official broadcaster of Japan. And yes, indeed, I agree with you. There is a kind of politicization of the media also in Japan. And I would also comment on the Fukushima accident in 2011. Actually, while covering the events there, NHK had a problem to have credible information from the Japanese government at the time. And we couldn't have the right information, and then we couldn't disseminate that information correctly to the people. And NHK actually, it's part of the government. It has policies that NHK is part of how Japan calls it disaster management. And one of our the role we have is that we have to disseminate information regarding each disaster, any disaster that occur, and it's a kind of an obligation. But if we can't receive the right information from the government, we cannot disseminate correctly. And my question is, how can we build that trust between the government and the media, and why not with the business side also? And actually, if I have to say that NHK is financed by the people of Japan. We receive each person or each family that have a TV set, they have to pay each month a certain amount of money. So the budget comes mainly from the population of Japan. And this budget is approved by the government later with the strategy that we submit to the government. And then we can use that budget, right? And so I don't know. And we say that we are an independent institution and we are disseminating the right information. We try not to be politicized, but we have that kind of difficulties to deal with the government. So and I go back to my question, is that how can we build that trust between the government, the media, and the people? If you have any idea. Thank you very much.
So I'll give you my view, but I also think it would be interesting to bring in Warren, who used to be editor-in-chief of the Straits Times, who's a media man. But my opinion of that case is the media looked too much like it was a derivative of government. And if in fact the government wasn't giving you appropriate answers, you should have gotten them elsewhere. You should have gotten them from independent scientists or from GE or from, others who actually had facts about, well, why was that reactor put on the sea level? Oh, because Tokyo Electric insisted on that, because it saved them $10 million or whatever the math. It should have been on the height, not on the sea level. Mistake. Tokyo Electric could have said, we screwed up. This is 1 in 100 years. We shouldn't have done that chance. If it was 1 in 1,000 years, we shouldn't have taken the chance. We'll never do that again. People would go, okay, that's honest. It was bad, but it was honest. None of that. And so again, I think it was insufficient kind of chasing of facts of, oh, well, we just don't know. That was what do you mean you don't know? You're supposed to know. Do you have something to say? Because you're a journalist.
Thanks. I actually think Richard is right in saying that the quality of information is a big, big factor in building trust in societies. And this is a challenge not just for the media or governments, it's a challenge for all societies to figure out how to get the resources to newsrooms so that they can do this job. I'm at the moment president of the World Editors Forum, which is a network of newsrooms all around the world. And that's one of the issues we are grappling with, how to make sure that newsrooms can survive into the long haul. Because whether or not you have newspapers or TV channels, people are going to need good, honest, reliable information they can trust. not to tell them how to vote, but to tell them what, this is the facts. These are the issues. You go make up your mind. During COVID, many newsrooms suffered a fall in their revenues because advertising dried up, and the small news titles were heavily challenged. The big ones did better because people were looking for credible information. Like my newsroom, when I was in the Straits Times, I took the decision to put all our public service information outside the paywall. And I did it with considerable trepidation because it meant a hit to revenues. But actually, we saw our audience just go through the roof, and subscriptions, instead of going down, went up. Because I think people saw that this is important information about what I'm going to do, what I'm going to do to keep my family safe, and what's it going to mean for my business. And they were willing to pay some money for that information. And I think that has to be the strategy for the media, how to build quality newsrooms, quality information, which people are willing to pay for. What we did in Singapore was a little bit like NHK. We moved the media from being a publicly listed institution to a trust fund, a little bit like Nikkei, where some of the funding comes from the society. It's controversial because people say you're taking government money, but actually, as you rightly put it, you're taking money from the people to serve the people, not from some political party. I think that has to be part of the solution. Won't work everywhere, but part of the solution for many newsrooms all around the world. And you've seen some in the US, like the Lensfest Institute, which is a public service organization which bought the Philadelphia Inquirer and then became a public trust. I believe that's one path to the future for the media, but there'll have to be others as well, which societies will have to figure out. But I do believe for democracies to survive, you must have good, credible, reliable information, because if we can't even agree on the basic facts, how do you have a decent, sensible argument? So that to me is critical as a challenge for the future.
Okay, Satomi-san.
Yeah, in terms of speaking up, still I think a lot of, or majority of Japanese CEOs think that doing nothing is the best option. But as a CEO of Sega, actually I have made a lot of statements about LGBTQ or Black Lives Matter or Stop Agent Hate and Ukraine war and the abortion thing as well. But, making it stance, making it, obvious stance is not finding your spotter, but instead identify your enemies. I'm always afraid of speaking up, but how do you encourage Japanese CEO to speaking up more? Actually, we withdrew from Russian business and lost the 3% revenue. But I thought this is the right thing to do. But if you see the statistics, only one third of countries supported Ukraine. I thought I was a majority, but I was not. So I always afraid of making those kind of statements. But how do you encourage other CEOs?
So again, the 4 issues that I identify for CEOs on which I think you should speak up: race, diversity, like, LGBTQ or Black, or, treatment of women. I think like this, obvious, accepted. Sustainability, no issue. Supply chain, where you source, how you source, things like this. Wage levels and reskilling. I am stunned by that statistic of 40% of Japanese are freelance workers. That is shocking, with no benefits. My God, I thought America was bad like this. Geopolitics. So Japan may be a different case to the US. But for the US, in that you sell a lot of product in the US, the Russia invasion of Ukraine was a singular moment of corporate responsibility. 1,300 companies left Russia, of which US companies 1,000. The rest British, German, etc. Fairly few Japanese, almost none. Almost none Chinese, almost none French, almost none Italian. So it depends on the country about geopolitics. But on a matter like Xinjiang and slave labor, and if you're Adidas and you have cotton from there, you're trapped because you have all sorts of consumers who are in the West who say, okay, are you a good company or are you not? And they said, sorry, we don't buy any more cotton from China, from the Uyghurs. And then the Chinese made a boycott and their sales went down by 50% in Adidas in China. So it's a hard job to be CEO. And I would say on geopolitics, in as much as you can go with the herd, do it. But Adidas was late. They could have gone with others earlier and stopped sourcing, quiet. Now then they have to be public because they're late. Don't be late. Be the wildebeest.
How important
Makes
is,
sense to you?
How important is the social media? Do you think like CEOs should do social media or the company should do social media?
I think it's the rare CEO who is going to be good at social media. You are. But most CEOs, it's probably better to let the company do it.
Okay.
You can take video of the CEO speaking. You can, but most of them are too stiff, too old, too whatever, too risky. I mean, they might say something dumb. It's not smart. I mean, look, I say dumb things. I mean, you know, I don't even know when I don't know that it's dumb because I'm my age. You know, like that's something alienating to a young girl. Okay.
But you have daughters, so you should.
Of course, I understand they beat me. Like, you idiot. No, I'll give you an example. So after George Floyd's murder, there was a protest in New York, then there was a riot, and then there was looting. And I went outside the next day and I took a photo and I put it up on Twitter and I said, you know, I don't think this is the right way to do. And oh my God, I got inundated by people. Are you comparing community and capitalism? You're a pig and all this. My daughter, 30 years old, you're an idiot. Get rid of this. Take it down. And so I took it down. I was mad that I had to take it down, but I don't believe in violence. You know, I think it's insane. I think, anyway, she just basically said, shut up. You can tell me that stuff. Just don't put it up on Twitter because you'll become mocked.
So she's a good advisor to you.
Advisor. That's the nicest way to say it. She's my editor.
Editor, yes.
In chief.
Thank you. I recently visited the Fukushima Daiichi plant, actually, and TEPCO has set up some type of museum or memorial just outside the no man's zone, and you can go there, and there is an exhibition and there is a video where they acknowledge some responsibility and they say, in a certain way, they are sorry. What's interesting is that it took them so long to get there, and apparently that center was set up ahead of the Olympics because they were expecting a lot of people to come in 2020 and to visit. But anyway, my point from there is about the speed of decision making in Japan and how very often institutions, whether government or business, they move very slowly. They want to build consensus, they want to discuss the issue, they want to look at it from different perspectives, and then they make a decision. And so, for example, in Russia, we are now seeing way into the war, more Japanese companies announcing they are moving out or selling to their local partner like Dentsu just did, etc. So my question would be, do you think Japan should continue to be so cautious and slow in decision making? Maybe some of that is good to retain. What is not good to retain? How to approach speed versus caution in decision making? Thank you.
This is a pretty easy question. I'm not in favor of that level of kind of slow, but I think if you're a board director, you should be pushing your companies to be doing contingency planning such that you already have made the decision about what you're going to do on half a dozen kinds of obvious issues that are going to confront you in supply chain or in sustainability or, you know, in treatment of customers or things like this. I mean, the classic case I'll tell you is about United Airlines, which 3 years ago pulled a passenger off the airplane in Chicago and said, you know, we have to put our pilot on, and he refused to get off. And then they called the police, and the guy got whacked a few times and was bleeding, and somebody was video, put it up, and suddenly they had a huge boycott in China because even if he wasn't Chinese, he was Chinese enough, and then they were boycotted. You know, he looked Chinese, and everybody. So he and Dr. Dow became like a hero. And the classic line by United was, "We reaccommodated the passenger," and so that's a really interesting word that I had never heard of. And so we were the PR firm for United, and I talked to the CEO, and I said, you know, you have 12 hours. It's up to you, but I would change my policy here, and I would say we're going to pay more for taking somebody off the plane. Instead of 1,000, pay them 10,000. We'll never have police on the plane again, ever, unless it's a real violence. And third, do something else, like throw in free luggage or I don't know, whatever, because this is a shit show. And so right away he changed the policy and apologized to Dr. Dow. But the point is, you got to be quick. You can't make it years, because then it's ingrained in the public head that TEPCO just failed. It's too late.
Some questions from online.
So we do have quite a few questions, but for the sake of time, maybe this might be a good closing one as well. So the question is, we're talking a lot about how Japan needs to change to improve trust, right? But if there was one thing other countries can learn from Japan, what would that be?
Interesting.
I think the Japanese are very good about consistency and reliability and stick to it. And once they've decided, that's it. You don't go back and forth like Disney. We don't. We're in favor of gays. We're not in favor of gays. Whatever it is. And so slow to decide, but solid in action. I would like to make it faster to decide and solid in action. But that's a really good Japanese trait.
Maybe one more.
We have time for one more. So this one talks a little bit about VUCA. So at Globus, we often commonly allude the fact that we are in the heightened period of VUCA. So with COVID, heightened geopolitical tensions, and accelerating technology ripe to disrupt every facet of our lives. Is the lack of trust not simply caused by those factors as well? What might we do to help calm the public from what's to come in the future?
I think you saw from the data that the lack of trust in Japan dates to Fukushima, and it wasn't much affected by COVID. It stayed low. And so, I mean, you see trust declines in other countries because of COVID, like the US, and institutions not recovering. But I think it's time for some hero companies in Japan. I think it's a really good idea that Sega become one of those. That was just for you, but no, I think that your economy can be significantly improved by a couple of leader companies, for example, on EVs. If Toyota and Nissan have, huge success with this and really push the transition, that would be great. Or Mitsubishi Electric has some kind of new way of doing nuclear, or like this. You need, Korea's trust levels have come up smartly because of Samsung. They have their own issues, but it's a big company. They do cell phones as well. They perform. And this competence thing is a really important aspect. And we need Japan to do better in trust. There needs to be a counterweight in Japan and Korea to the theory of China, in terms of, we have to have authoritarian, our student from DePaul's theory of, Japan and Korea are at the same low level of sort of Western democracies, and they need to do better. They need to change the dynamic that democracy can work, and it can work in Asia, and it can work in industrial economies, because we'll fix the fairness issue, for instance. And anyway, over to you.
Very good. So it's about time for the closing. Maybe do you have any messages for Japanese or like Asian society about what we should do?
I think my biggest message is business is the most trusted institution in the world. And it is our responsibility as business leaders to use that position for the benefit of society, not just for shareholders. And the expectation of the world is that you will address societal issues, that you will make sure that there's fairness and that there'll be a good environment and that there'll be affordable food and that there'll be mortgages that people can afford and that they can aspire to houses. Because business is the force for good and for change in society. It is the proven model of people rising. People came out of poverty in China not because of the government. It came up because there was opportunity with Alibaba and all these companies. That's the change. They're going backwards now, as far as I can see. But the point about business leadership and also CEO leadership at this moment in time when there's a void, at the moment, there's a void in the world that business has to fill. Government has left a massive void. Government is distrusted. In a lot of developing markets, you see 50 points difference in Mexico and South Africa between business and government. Proven incompetence. So business has to lead. Business has to show that it can do so in a fair way, and that you will get better employees. You'll get consumers buying your brands. It will be a virtuous circle.
Very good. Richard Edelman. Let's have a little hands applause. Richard Edelman. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you.